Hi, I'm Andy, and this is my lesson on user input in Java. In this lesson, I'll show you how to get input from the program's user. I'll also show you how to convert numeric input to an integer. Let's get started. Suppose we want to write a program in which we ask the user to enter a password. A password, of course, is simply a sequence of characters, what we call a string in Java. Asking the user to enter a password is easy. We just need to use a print line statement. Now for the harder part. We need our program to do two things. First, it must pause until the user actually types in some information, and then it needs to grab that information and store it as a string. There are several ways to do this in Java. I'll show you what I think is the easiest way to do this by using the readline method. To use the readline method, we type system.console.readline, just like that. Don't worry about this part of this line of code at this point. Just make sure you include it whenever you need to execute the readline method. What I love about this method is it does both tasks for us automatically. When it executes, the program immediately pauses and waits patiently for the user to type something in and hit the Enter key. Once that key is pressed, a new string object containing the user's entered info is created. And the address of that string object is then returned. This means we can use an assignment operator to capture that address and store it in a string reference variable. Let's do that. I'll put an assignment operator right here, and then on the left I'll make a string variable called entered password to store that returned string address. To test our code, let's print out the text in entered password so we can see if it contains exactly the same string as was entered by the user. Now we'll run our program and see what happens. At this point, the program is in the midst of executing the readline method. That method has paused the execution of our program as it waits for the Enter key to be pressed. I'll enter some info and then hit Enter. Notice the program resumed execution once I hit Enter. Also, it looks like we successfully stored the entered string because when we printed out the contents of entered password, we got exactly the same text as I typed in. Sometimes programs need the user to enter numbers, not strings. For example, a simple calculator app processes numeric input from the users. Here's how to do that. First, we'll obtain the user input exactly the same way as before. Notice how I'm storing that input as a string, even though I know it's an integer. After this line of code executes, user input contains a string of the entered digits. For example, the string 25. Watch what happens when we try to involve that number in a mathematical operation. I'll try to add the entered number to 5. Notice we got a compiler error because even though user input will contain nothing but digits, those digits will be stored as a string object, not a primitive int. Therefore, this line of code doesn't work because you can't find the sum of a string and an int. To fix this, we need to convert user input to an int. The method that does that is called parseInt. Here's how we use that method. Notice in the parseInt method, we need to put a reference to the string object that contains our number. ParseInt will then return that exact number, this time as an int. Like always, we're using the assignment operator to capture the returned value and store it somewhere. In this case, in an int variable called num. Let's make sure that solved our problem. Good, it worked. Here's what happened. When I entered the 7, it was stored as a string. The parseInt command then converted that string to the integer 7. So this line of code ended up adding up two ints, 7 and 5, and storing their total, 12, in a variable called sum. So when we printed sum to the console, we got the integer 12 to print out. This parseInt method can be used whenever you have a string consisting only of digits and you want to convert it to an int so you can do some math with it. By the way, there's a parse double method in Java that works exactly the same way. And that wraps up this lesson on obtaining all types of user input in Java. I'm Andy. Thanks for watching and coding with me today.